breaking up with its colonizer. Senegal just moved to ditch France's currency, the franc, a currency that helped France control African countries long after independence.
West Africa is breaking up with its colonizer. The sentence alone feels like an earthquake shaking decades of silence, and today its epicenter lies in Senegal. With one bold declaration, the nation has chosen to abandon the CFA franc, a currency born in the ashes of colonialism, yet still used as a leash long after the flags of independence were raised. This is not just an economic shift, it is a strike at the very heart of neo-colonial control, where money dictated sovereignty and foreign soldiers guarded borders in the name of stability. Senegal's decision tears away the mask, exposing a deeper question: what truly remains of independence if a nation's lifeblood, its currency, is still chained to Paris? And now, with this break, the world must ask, is Senegal lighting the torch for Africa's economic liberation, or stepping into uncharted chaos that could reshape the continent's destiny? The morning of April 8, 2025 will forever be remembered as a turning point not only for Senegal, but for the entire African continent. In one stroke of political courage, President Bassirou Diomaye Faye stood before his nation and declared two decisions that shook the pillars of Paris's influence: the abandonment of the CFA franc and the order for all French troops to leave Senegalese soil before September. It was a moment when history and defiance merged, and the echoes carried far beyond Dakar. Two levers of control, economic and military, were dismantled in a single morning, a double strike that sent shockwaves through chancelleries from Brussels to Washington. But beneath the applause lies a deeper question. Why did Senegal target currency first, and not the soldiers guarding its soil? The symbolism of money cannot be overstated. For decades, the CFA franc was more than paper and coins. It was a chain disguised as stability, a reminder that independence could be celebrated on the surface while economic sovereignty remained hostage. On April 8th, the announcement was not delivered in whispers or vague promises, but in absolute clarity. Senegal would no longer tie its future to a monetary system designed in Paris and enforced through dependency. The people erupted in applause, some in tears, because this was not merely a financial reform. It was the reclaiming of dignity. Yet every act of liberation carries risk. Without the CFA franc, who would guarantee Senegal's reserves, who would underwrite its future loans, and who would ensure that inflation does not spiral out of control? At the same time, the second blow was equally seismic: the call for French forces to pack their bases and leave. For over 6 decades, soldiers wearing foreign uniforms patrolled Senegalese land under the banner of security cooperation. But on this day, the message was clear: security must be built by Senegalese hands, not rented from abroad. The September deadline was not accidental. It was a countdown that announced to the world that Africa's old arrangements of guardianship and tutelage were reaching their end. The symbolism was staggering. Within 6 months, Senegal aimed to sever both the wallet and the sword of colonial influence. But could a nation so deeply woven into Paris's networks truly disentangle itself without backlash? The power of April 8th lies in its duality. It was both celebration and uncertainty. Streets filled with jubilant voices, flags waved high, and young people spoke of a second independence. Yet economists warned of turbulence ahead, and skeptics feared that without careful planning, bold declarations could collapse under financial strain or diplomatic retaliation. Was this a gamble or a calculated step towards sovereignty? The only certainty was that Senegal had forced the world to look again at Africa, not as a silent spectator, but as a stage where history was being rewritten in real time. And in this rewriting, one central question lingers: was this the day Senegal broke free, or the day it stepped into a storm that will test every fiber of its independence? The CFA franc did not begin as a choice, it began as an imposition. Created in 1945, in the aftermath of World War II, it was presented as a tool of stability, but in reality, it became a nearly 80-year mechanism of control. While Africa raised new flags and wrote new constitutions, this currency remained a silent chain, tying independent states back to the treasury in Paris. For decades, the CFA franc was hailed as a guarantee of trust in international markets, yet behind this polished language lay the reality that sovereignty had been mortgaged. How can a nation truly claim independence when its very reserves are held hostage in another capital? At the heart of the mechanism was a stark requirement. Member states were obliged to deposit 50% of their foreign currency reserves into the French treasury. In return, Paris promised convertibility, first into the French franc, later into the euro. On paper, this looked like stability. In practice, it meant surrendering the steering wheel of economic destiny. African nations could not freely determine interest rates, adjust money supply, or devalue their currency when local industries needed breathing room. The supposed guarantee was, in fact, a lock. Was this really partnership, or was it dependency dressed in the robes of modern finance? The consequences were profound. Countries tied to the CFA franc could not adjust exchange rates to favor their farmers or to make their exports competitive. While Europe reaped the benefits of cheap African raw materials, cotton, cocoa, uranium, African industries were left without protection, forever competing at a disadvantage. Factories struggled, innovation was stifled, and generations of young workers were told to wait for opportunities that never came. Imagine a continent rich in gold, oil, and fertile land, yet unable to decide the price of its own labor. Was this coincidence, or was it design? By keeping the CFA franc pegged rigidly to the euro, Africa was essentially outsourcing its monetary policy to the European Central Bank. Decisions made in Frankfurt and Paris echoed in Dakar, Bamako, and Abidjan without those nations ever having a seat at the table. When Europe adjusted interest rates for its own growth, Africa bore the cost. When inflation rose in the Eurozone, African consumers paid the price. It was a system where the benefits flowed north, while the burden settled south. Can sovereignty exist if the pulse of a nation's economy is dictated abroad? The decision by Senegal to abandon this framework was more than symbolic. It was surgical. Cutting ties with the CFA franc meant severing a cord that had acted like an umbilical link to Paris, a cord that fed stability but drained autonomy. This was not just about economics, it was about psychology. For decades, young Africans were told their prosperity depended on guarantees from Europe. April 8, 2025, shattered that narrative. By stepping away from the CFA, Senegal declared that Africans must be the authors of their own monetary story. But such declarations come with storms. Without the CFA's guarantee, how will Senegal manage foreign reserves, attract investors, and stabilize prices? The answer is not yet clear, and therein lies the tension that grips the continent. Some celebrate this as the dawn of true independence, while others warn of volatility ahead. But one fact remains undeniable: the CFA franc was never neutral. It was a system tilted to maintain access to Africa's resources while limiting Africa's autonomy. Dismantling it is both liberation and challenge, both triumph and trial. Will this bold step inspire others to follow, creating a wave of monetary emancipation across West Africa?